daughter set up my affair. Our world turned upside down that night. I had everything, a loving family, a stable life, but my own selfishness turned it all to ash. My name is Alice, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not proud of who I am. My husband, William, is a good man. He works hard, he's kind, and he loves me. We've been married for years, and we have a beautiful 17-year-old daughter who is the light of his life. You'd think I'd be happy and feel fulfilled. I have everything a person could want, a family, a home, stability. But for some reason, it's not enough for me. A few months ago, something shifted inside me. I started feeling restless, bored even. William didn't do anything wrong. He didn't hurt me, or cheat on me, or treat me badly. He's the same steady man I married all those years ago. But I wanted more. I wanted excitement. I wanted to feel alive again. And that's how I ended up meeting Harry. It happened on a rainy afternoon when my car broke down on the side of the road. I was standing there, soaked to the bone, trying to figure out what to do, when Harry pulled up in his shiny black car. He offered me a ride, and I didn't hesitate. He was charming, with a warm smile and a voice that made me forget how miserable I was feeling. That ride changed everything. At first, Harry and I were just friends. We exchanged numbers, and he would check on me now and then to see how I was doing. But the more we talked, the more I found myself drawn to him. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in years. He made me feel seen, like I wasn't just someone's wife or someone's mom, but a woman who mattered. It wasn't long before our friendship turned into something more. Our affair started small. We'd meet for coffee or lunch, sneaking around like teenagers. At first, I told myself it was harmless. I told myself I deserved this little slice of happiness, that it didn't mean I loved William any less. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. I was crossing a line, and I didn't care. The more I saw Harry, the more I wanted him. Our meetings became more frequent, more intimate. He made me feel things I hadn't felt in years. He made me feel wanted, desired, alive. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but the guilt wasn't enough to stop me. I was addicted to the thrill of it all. At home, I acted like nothing had changed. I smiled at William, kissed him goodnight, and went about my day as if I wasn't hiding this huge secret. Our daughter didn't suspect a thing either. To them, I was the same Alice I had always been. But I wasn't. I was living a double life, and I was loving every minute of it. The affair wasn't just about the physical connection. It was the way Harry made me feel. He listened to me. He understood me. He made me laugh. He was everything I felt was missing in my marriage. William, on the other hand, was predictable, steady, and boring. I hated myself for thinking that way, but it was the truth. I craved the excitement Harry brought into my life, and I wasn't ready to give it up. As the months went by, my relationship with Harry grew more intense. We started meeting in hotels, spending hours together in a world that felt like it was just ours. Every time I was with him, I felt like I was escaping my dull reality. But the more time I spent with Harry, the more I distanced myself from my family. I didn't even notice it at first, but looking back, it's obvious. There were moments when the guilt would creep in. I'd see the way William looked at me, so full of love and trust, and I'd feel a pang of shame. I'd tell myself that I needed to end things with Harry, that it wasn't fair to my family. But then Harry would call or text, and all my guilt would disappear. I couldn't stay away from him. I didn't want to. Then came Christmas morning. It should have been a day for family, a day to celebrate and be together. But instead, I woke up to a message from Harry. He told me he missed me and wanted to see me. My heart skipped a beat, and without even thinking, I got dressed and left the house. William was still asleep when I slipped out the door. I didn't leave a note or say goodbye. I just went to see Harry, like it was the most normal thing in the world. We spent a few hours together, and it was everything I had been craving. But when it was time to leave, something in me felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line I couldn't come back from. When I got home, the Christmas celebrations had already begun without me. William was in the living room with our daughter, opening presents and laughing. He looked up when I walked in, his face a mix of confusion and concern. He asked me where I had been, saying he hadn't even realized I was gone until he woke up. I looked him straight in the eye and lied. I told him I had something too important to ignore. I had no shame, none at all. I lied to William that Christmas morning, and he didn't even doubt me. His trust in me was unshakable, and I used it to my advantage without a second thought. I knew I was doing something terrible, but I didn't care. I was so lost in Harry, in the excitement and thrill of it all, that nothing else seemed to matter anymore. I wanted to see him every day, and most days I did. Our time together was wild and reckless. Harry brought out a side of me I didn't even know existed. We didn't hold back, and we didn't care about the risks. We took pictures together, recorded videos, and texted constantly and exchanged pictures and videos. My phone was full of memories I should have never made. Every time I looked at those pictures or watched those videos, I felt a rush. It was like a drug, and I was completely hooked. At home, I was a different person. I went through the motions of being a wife and mother, but my heart wasn't in it. My mind was always on Harry, what we'd done, what we'd said, when I'd see him next. William didn't notice a thing, or maybe he just didn't want to believe that anything was wrong. And my daughter was busy with her own life. She didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. On Christmas, we got her a new phone because her old one had been lost. She was so happy, and I felt a small pang of guilt. But as usual, I brushed it off. I told myself I deserved my happiness, that I wasn't hurting anyone as long as they didn't know. A few days later, she asked for my phone to save her new number. I handed it over without a second thought. I didn't think that I needed to be worried. She wouldn't look through my phone. She'd just save her number and give it back. At least that's what I thought, because she never cared about my phone or what was on it. Children never do. While she had my phone, I went about my business, completely unaware of what was happening. She sat on the couch, quiet and focused, scrolling through my phone. She saved her number, but then something caught her eye. It was my most frequent contact, and it wasn't William. She clicked on it, curious, and opened our chat. The messages between me and Harry were nothing close to innocent. They were full of things I shouldn't have been saying things, and sending media files that no married woman should say or send to another man. She read through them. I could only imagine how her eyes grew wider with every word. And then she found the pictures and videos. I didn't know any of this was happening. I was in another room, folding laundry and humming to myself. When I finished, I walked back into the living room. My phone was lying on the bed where I'd left it, but my daughter was still sitting on the couch. She had a strange look on her face, like she was confused or upset. I asked her if she was okay. She just nodded, got up, and left the room without a word. I thought it was odd, but I didn't press her. I didn't know then what she had seen or what she was thinking. I didn't know the damage I'd just caused. I picked up my phone and checked it, but nothing seemed out of place. The screen was locked and everything looked normal. I didn't realize that my daughter had gone through it, that she had seen everything. I didn't know that my world was about to fall apart. At first, nothing happened. My life carried on like it always did, and I thought everything was fine. My daughter just seemed quieter than usual, and I didn't think much of it. Teenagers go through phases. One day they're laughing and chatting, and the next they're locked in their rooms, wanting to be left alone. I told myself it was just a phase, but something was different. She wouldn't eat much at dinner, just picking at her food like she wasn't hungry. When I asked her a question, I'd have to repeat myself 2 or 3 times before she answered, and even then, it was always short and curt. She started snapping at me over the smallest things, rolling her eyes or talking back in a way she never had before. I should have realized something was wrong, but I didn't. I thought it was just teenage angst. I thought maybe she was upset about a friend or some boy at school. I didn't connect it to what she'd seen on my phone because I didn't know she'd seen it. Days turned into weeks, and her behavior only got worse. And William even cautioned her about it. She became colder, more distant. It was like there was a wall between us, and I couldn't figure out how to break through it. She spent more time in her room, her headphones on, ignoring the world around her, and when she did come out, she barely looked at me. Then one evening, everything came crashing down. William and I were sitting in the living room, enjoying a quiet moment together. We'd opened a bottle of wine and were laughing about something silly, something normal. For a moment, everything felt perfect. William got up to grab another bottle from the cellar, and that's when she appeared. She walked into the room, her face set in a way I hadn't seen before. There was pure anger, no sadness. She also had this steely determination that sent a chill down my spine. She didn't hesitate. She came right up to me and demanded answers. Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. She knew everything. She said it with such confidence, like there was no room for doubt. My heart stopped, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I tried to play it cool. I tried to deflect, to brush her off like she didn't know what she was talking about. But she wasn't having it. She kept pushing, her voice growing louder and sharper. My chest tightened as I glanced toward the direction of the cellar, praying that William couldn't hear us. And then she said it. She told me she had proof. She'd seen the messages, the pictures, the videos. She'd sent them to herself. My blood turned to ice as she pulled out her phone and showed me. There it was, right in front of me, all the evidence of what I'd done. I panicked. I didn't know what to do or say. My first instinct was to deny it, to make up some excuse, but it was pointless. She had everything. I had no choice. My hands were shaking as I stood up and told her to come with me. I led her to an empty room so William wouldn't walk in on us. I was still trying to maintain the illusion of a happy family. I closed the door behind us and turned to face her. She was staring at me, her eyes filled with anger and hurt. I broke down. I told her everything. I told her about Harry, about the affair, about the lies I'd been telling. I didn't hold back. I couldn't. She already knew the worst of it. There was no point in pretending anymore. As I spoke, I felt the weight of my actions crashing down on me. I saw the pain in her eyes, the betrayal, the disappointment. It was like I had shattered something inside her, something that could never be fixed. When I was done, I fell to my knees and begged her not to tell William. I begged her to keep my secret, to protect me from the mess I had created. I told her I'd do anything, that I'd make it up to her, that I'd fix everything. But as I looked up at her, I realized I had no right to ask for her forgiveness, no right to expect her silence. I had broken her trust, and I had no idea if it could ever be mended. And no matter how much I begged or pleaded, my daughter was like a stone. Her eyes were hard, and her face showed nothing but anger and pain. I tried to explain myself, but every word I said just made things worse. She wasn't going to let this go, and deep down I knew it. I told her she had to keep my secret. I said it was for the good of our family, that if she loved us, she wouldn't tell her father. I told her it would break us apart if the truth came out, that it would destroy everything we had as a family. I was desperate, grasping at anything that might work. But instead of convincing her, I made it worse. Her face turned red, and I could see the anger boiling inside her. She told me I had no right to talk about love for our family when I was the one who didn't love it enough to stay faithful. She said I was the one who broke everything, not her. Her words hit me like a slap. She wasn't wrong. I had done this. I had lied and cheated and hurt the people I was supposed to care about the most. But hearing it from her, my own daughter, made it feel 100 times worse. Before I could say anything else, she stormed out of the room. My heart stopped, and I felt panic rising in my chest. I ran after her, calling her name, begging her to stop, but she didn't listen. She marched straight into the living room where William was sitting, sipping his wine and waiting for me to come back. The look on her face must have told him something was wrong, because he put his glass down and sat up straighter. She didn't waste any time. She told him everything. She didn't sugarcoat it or hold anything back. She told him about Harry, about the messages and the pictures and the videos. She told him I had been lying to him for months, sneaking around behind his back. I felt like the world was crumbling around me. I tried to stop her, tried to interrupt, but she just kept going. The words spilled out of her like a flood, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. William didn't say a word. He just sat there, staring at her, then at me, his face pale and his eyes wide. He looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing, like he couldn't believe that the woman he had married, the woman he trusted, had done this to him. I stood there frozen, unable to speak, unable to move. My daughter turned to me, her face full of tears and anger, and said something that made my heart break into a million pieces. Then she walked away, leaving me and her phone alone with William. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. And in that moment, I knew I had lost everything. I don't know how long we stood there in silence. My husband's face looked like he was being torn apart from the inside, and my daughter's footsteps echoed down the hall as she left the room. I couldn't let it end like this, so I did the only thing I could think of. I started pleading. I walked closer to him, my hands trembling as I reached out. I begged him to listen, to let me explain, but the look in his eyes told me I was too late. He looked at me like I was a stranger, like he couldn't even recognize me anymore. That's when he finally spoke. His voice cracked as he asked me why I had done this, why I had lied to him, why I had thrown away everything we had built together. He wasn't yelling, not yet, but his words hit me harder than any scream ever could. I didn't know what to say. I opened my mouth, but no good excuse came out. So instead, I told him I wasn't feeling our marriage anymore, that things hadn't been the same for me. I told him I felt stuck, that I needed something more. But I couldn't stop there. No, I had to make it worse. I said it was his fault. I blamed him. I said he didn't make me feel loved enough, that he didn't try hard enough, that he didn't give me what I needed. I twisted the truth, trying to shift the blame onto him because I was desperate to save myself. The second the words left my mouth, I saw the change in him. His face went from heartbroken to furious in an instant. His voice rose, shaking as he yelled at me. He said I had no right to blame him for my mistakes. He said I was the one who had made the choice to cheat, the choice to lie, and he was right. But I didn't stop. I yelled back, trying to defend myself, trying to make him understand that I hadn't meant for it to go this far. But my words were empty, and he wasn't listening. Our voices filled the room, echoing off the walls as we screamed at each other. I shouted things I didn't mean, things I knew would hurt him, and he did the same to me. It was like all the love we had for each other had turned into anger, and we didn't care how much damage we were doing. At one point, he grabbed the wine bottle off the table and slammed it onto the floor. It shattered into a million pieces, red wine spilling everywhere like blood. Then he knocked over the wine glasses, sending shards of glass flying. It wasn't just the wine and the glass that was breaking in that moment. Our marriage was breaking too, and we both knew it. I stood there shaking as he glared at me with tears streaming down his face. That's when my daughter came back into the room. She looked at the mess, at the shattered glass and the spilled wine, and then at me. Her eyes were full of disappointment, and her words cut deeper than anything my husband had said. She called me a disappointment, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. She said I wasn't the mother she thought I was, and then she turned and walked away. I wanted to go after her, to say something, anything, that might fix this. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was stand there and watch as my family fell apart because of me. The silence in the house after my daughter left was heavy. It pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. My husband picked up her phone from the table, where she'd left it, and I froze. I knew what he would find, but I couldn't let it happen. I rushed toward him, my voice trembling as I begged him not to look through it, but he ignored me. He started scrolling, his expression darkening with every swipe. I stood there, panicking, unsure of what to do. I wanted to grab the phone from him, but I didn't dare. I tried to tell him it didn't matter, that it wasn't what it looked like, but he wasn't listening. Then he stopped scrolling. His eyes were fixed on the screen, and I saw his jaw clench. My stomach dropped. I knew what he'd found the picture, the one I should have deleted but didn't. It was of me and Harry in our bedroom, on our bed, the same bed I shared with my husband. His hand tightened around the phone, and he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, something that told me I had broken something that could never be fixed. He didn't shout right away. His voice was low and cold when he spoke, and it sent a chill down my spine. He said he felt humiliated, that I had insulted him in the worst way possible. He told me that if I were a man, he would have beaten me to a pulp for what I had done. I tried to respond, to say something that might calm him down, but he didn't let me. He said he wasn't going to waste his energy on me because I wasn't worth it, but Harry was a different story. He said he was going to find Harry and teach him a lesson he would never forget. His voice was shaking with rage now, and I knew he meant every word. My heart raced as I realized what was about to happen. He stormed toward the door, grabbing his keys on the way. I ran after him, my hands trembling as I tried to stop him. I grabbed his arm, begged him not to do this, but he turned on me with a look that made me step back. He said if I stopped him, he would tell everyone at work about my affair. He would make sure all my coworkers, even my boss, knew what kind of person I was. His words hit me like a slap, and I froze. I let go of his arm, and he stormed out the door, slamming it behind him. I stood there for a moment, shaking, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about calling Harry, warning him, but then I remembered what my husband had said. He told me not to help Harry, not to try to protect him, but I couldn't help myself. I needed to protect Harry. But when I looked for my phone, it was gone. And William said something else, something that made my knees go weak. He told me I shouldn't be in his house by the time he got back. His house, not our house. I sank to the floor, my head in my hands, as the weight of what I'd done crashed down on me. I didn't know where he was going or what he was going to do, but I knew it was my fault. All of it. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but I had no one to turn to. My daughter hated me. My husband despised me. And Harry? Harry was the reason I was in this mess. I sat there shaking, wondering how my life had come to this, and knowing there was no one to blame but myself. The moment my husband stormed out of the house, I knew he was going to do something reckless. My hands were shaking so much that I couldn't even think straight. He had my phone, and I had no idea what he was planning. I felt trapped in my own mess, but instead of sitting there helplessly, I grabbed my keys and ran to my car. As I started the engine, my mind raced. I had no idea where Harry lived, so I couldn't warn him even if I wanted to. I wasn't sure if my husband knew either, but something told me he didn't need an address. He was angry enough to make anything happen. A text notification came through the car's Bluetooth system, and it caught my attention. It was from Harry. My heart sank. My husband must have messaged him from my phone, pretending to be me. My stomach twisted as I realized my husband had lured Harry into a trap. I drove as fast as I could, following the directions to the meeting place my husband must have arranged with Harry. I wasn't thinking about anything else, just about stopping whatever was about to happen. When I got there, I spotted them right away. They were standing in a parking lot, not far from the entrance of a small coffee shop. My husband was towering over Harry, his fists clenched, his whole body radiating anger. Harry, on the other hand, looked calm, too calm for what was happening. I parked the car and ran toward them, shouting for them to stop, but it was too late. My husband had already swung at Harry, landing a punch on his jaw. Harry staggered back but didn't fall. Instead, he wiped his face, smirked, and said something to my husband that I couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it sent my husband into a frenzy. He lunged at Harry, and they were suddenly on the ground, fists flying. I screamed, begging them to stop, but neither of them even looked at me. People around the parking lot started gathering. Some were pulling out their phones to record. Others were shouting for them to break it up. A few brave souls tried to step in and separate them, but my husband was too strong and too angry to be held back. Harry wasn't exactly weak either. He managed to land a few punches of his own, and the whole thing turned into a chaotic mess. I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do. My voice felt small compared to the shouting and the scuffling. Finally, a group of bystanders managed to pull them apart. Both of them were breathing heavily, their faces bruised and bloody. My husband looked like he was ready to go for another round, but the people holding him back wouldn't let him, and then Harry opened his mouth. He looked straight at my husband and said something that made my stomach drop. He told my husband that he wasn't a real man, that he couldn't keep me happy, and that's why I'd turned to him. His voice was loud enough for everyone around to hear, and the smug grin on his face made it clear he enjoyed rubbing it in. My husband's reaction was immediate. He broke free from the people holding him and lunged at Harry again, his fist raised. I had no choice but to step between them, my hands outstretched. I screamed at them to stop, my voice cracking from the strain. My husband froze, his fist inches from my face. For a moment, everything went silent. He stared at me with a look I'll never forget. It was pure hatred mixed with heartbreak. I could see the tears welling up in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He lowered his fist, turned to Harry, and said something so bitter it felt like a knife to my chest. He told Harry that he wasn't worth another second of his time. Then he looked at me and said he never wanted to see me again. Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of onlookers. I stood there shaking, as the weight of his words sank in. The crowd started to disperse, and Harry tried to say something to me, but I couldn't even look at him. My whole world was crumbling, and I had no one to blame but myself. Right now, I don't know what to do. I'm losing my mind. I need help, please. Someone should tell me what I can do to make William stop being angry at me. Update. Hello, everyone. 2 weeks have passed since the night everything fell apart, and I feel like my world has been flipped upside down. My marriage is over, my family is broken, and I am completely alone. Every day feels like a heavy weight pressing down on me, and no matter what I do, I can't escape it. After that horrible fight, I thought my husband didn't really mean what he said. I convinced myself that he just needed time to cool down and that he would eventually let me back into the house. But I was wrong. When I tried to go back, I couldn't even get through the gate. He must have told the security guards not to let me in. I stood there for hours, calling his phone over and over, but he didn't answer. I even tried calling my daughter, but she didn't pick up either. I finally gave up and went to a cheap motel nearby. As I sat on the lumpy bed in that tiny room, the reality of my situation started to sink in. My husband didn't want me back. My daughter didn't want to talk to me. And everyone, absolutely everyone, knew about my affair. The fight between my husband and Harry wasn't just a fight, it was a spectacle. It happened in public, with so many people watching, and now the story has spread like wildfire. People at work, people in our neighborhood, even strangers online, they all know. I've become the center of gossip, and the shame is unbearable. I thought I could handle it, but I can't. Every time I try to go out, I feel like everyone is staring at me. I hear whispers and snickers, and it feels like they're all pointing fingers, calling me a terrible person. And the worst part is they're right. I did this to myself. My daughter hasn't spoken to me since that night. She hasn't answered a single call or text, and I don't blame her. I betrayed her trust in the worst possible way. She looked up to me, and I let her down. The thought of her hating me breaks my heart, but I know I deserve it. The house I once called home is no longer mine. My husband hasn't filed for divorce yet, but I know it's coming. He hasn't said a word to me directly, but I heard through mutual friends that he's already talking to lawyers. He's moving on, and I'm stuck in this miserable place, unable to fix what I've broken. In my desperation, I turned to Harry. I know it was a bad idea, but I didn't know where else to go. I thought he might comfort me, but I was wrong about that too. Harry doesn't want to be involved with me anymore unless there's something in it for him. He said he didn't sign up for all this drama, and now that everything's out in the open, he's distancing himself from me. It's like I'm being punished from every angle. I thought I had control over my life, but now I see that I've lost everything. My family, my home, my reputation, it's all gone. And for what? For a fleeting thrill? For something that never really mattered? I sit in this tiny motel room day after day, staring at the walls and replaying everything in my mind. I think about the lies I told, the people I hurt, and the mess I created. The regret is suffocating. I feel like I'm drowning and there's no one to pull me out. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to move forward. All I know is that I'm alone, and it's all my fault, and I don't see how my life can get any worse. Update. I was wrong. My life has gotten worse. 4 months have passed since my life completely crumbled, and I don't even know who I am anymore. Everything I once had is gone, and I have no one to blame but myself. My marriage is officially over. My husband filed for divorce, and it was finalized faster than I ever imagined. He didn't want to drag it out. He wanted me out of his life as quickly as possible, and he made sure that I didn't get a single thing from our life together. The house, the cars, even the furniture, all of it went to him, and honestly, I don't even deserve any of it. He's keeping our daughter too, which is the part that hurts the most. I get visitation rights, but what's the point when she doesn't want to see me? She won't answer my calls or texts, and every time I show up, she just looks at me like I'm a stranger. I try to talk to her, but she won't even sit in the same room as me for more than a few minutes. I can see the disappointment in her eyes, and it breaks my heart every time. She used to be my little girl, the one who would come to me for advice and hugs. Now she doesn't want anything to do with me, and I know it's my fault. My parents have disowned me too. They're so angry and ashamed that they won't even let me stay at their house. When they first found out about what I did, they called me every name in the book. They said I ruined my family and embarrassed them in front of everyone they know. They told me they didn't raise me to be this selfish, and honestly, they're right. I tried to explain myself, but it didn't matter. No one wants to hear excuses from the person who blew up her own life. I've lost everyone who ever cared about me, and I feel like I'm walking through the world completely alone. Even my workplace couldn't keep me. When the news of my affair became public, it brought so much negative attention to the office that they had no choice but to let me go. They said it wasn't personal, but I know it was. Nobody wants to be associated with someone like me. Now I'm struggling to make ends meet. On top of losing everything, I'm also supposed to pay child support. How am I supposed to do that when I don't even have a steady job? I'm trying to find work, but every interview ends the same way. They look at me like they already know who I am, and they don't want to take a chance on someone with my reputation. I spend most of my days in a tiny studio apartment that I can barely afford. The walls are thin, and I can hear my neighbors arguing or laughing while I sit alone, thinking about everything I've lost. I can't even look at myself in the mirror without feeling sick. The worst part is knowing that I did this to myself. I had a good life, a loving husband, a beautiful daughter, a stable job, but I threw it all away for something meaningless. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about how much I was hurting the people who loved me. Now I'm left with nothing but regret. Regret for what I did, regret for what I lost, and regret for the person I've become. I don't know how to fix any of it, or if it's even possible to fix. All I know is that I'm finished. There is no hope for me, so this will be my last update. Goodbye.